She's a native life and lifelong resident of Auburn, California. A Tevis Cup Ride, 100-mile ride enthusiast, an avid trail runner, and an advocate for Auburn as the endurance capital of the world. She has also been past and present an Auburn City Council member, a former mayor, and soon to become mayor again, as she has now been elected or selected?
Elected.
As mayor pro tem or vice mayor, and currently serves on, I'll emphasize this, multiple boards and commissions, including the past chair of both the Auburn City Planning and Auburn Historic Design Review Commissions. You're a past member of the Placer County Parks Commission. And interestingly enough, between her times as a council member, she served under two administrations, California State Governor Schwarzenegger and Wilson's administration, serving also as Chief Deputy Cabinet Secretary. For one or both?
For Governor Schwarzenegger.
Schwarzenegger, okay. Very good. Well, this conversation this evening can meander in a variety of different ways, but we're going to, talk about the Western States Trail, focus a little bit of attention on the part west of Auburn towards Sacramento. We want to talk also about your family history and your ranch. We also want to visit and fast forward to the economics of the Western States Trail. And then lastly, talk a little bit about what your plans are, perhaps even now as a city council member, and more importantly, when you do become mayor. And I have a couple of examples to share with you what past mayors have done as it's related to the Western States Trail. But so as to begin. The Western States Trail west of Auburn. When someone mentions the Western States Trail today, many will immediately default to that of the Tevis Cup 100-mile ride from Truckee, or the Truckee area, North Lake Tahoe area, to Auburn, as well as the Western States endurance run, the ultramarathon run from Squaw Valley to Auburn. Squaw Valley is now Tahoe Palisades.
Actually, I think they call it Olympic Valley?
Well,
Tahoe Palisades?
There's whatever the politically correct
new name
is. So immediately people think of the trail between that area, east of the Sierra Nevadas, to Auburn. But what they failed to incorporate, or not know to incorporate, is that part of the trail eastward to Carson City, and that westward from Auburn to Sacramento. Thus, the Western States Trail, or capital to capital. I give presentations now and then to service groups and others, and inevitably someone will ask, well, why is it that you're talking about the Western States Trail, plural, in its form, and it's just from Tahoe to Auburn in the state of California? Well, we can expand upon that. We know that the Adams Express Company, and later the Wells Fargo Express Company, had messengers traveling up and down the American River from Sacramento all the way up to Michigan Bluff and beyond, actually. So you recently did some research. I wonder if you wouldn't mind.
I did a little
that.
research, and I have to kind of refer to my notes a little bit, but it was actually, I was preparing for a speech to give to the Chamber of Commerce's Leadership Auburn class. And it was about the city of Auburn and the city council. And I wanted to just kind of dig into the history of the incorporation of the city. It's kind of an interesting story that I had known about, but didn't really have a lot of details. And that was that, Auburn, the area has been around for a long time, right? We know that gold was discovered in the Auburn Ravine by Claude Channa in 1848. And it was at the time first called North Fork Dry Diggins, and then it was Wood Dry Diggins, and then it ultimately became Auburn in 1848. There were some miners from, I guess, Auburn, New York that came in and named it.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is it was here, it was because of the gold rush and everything, but it incorporated in 1860 pretty much for the express purpose of funding what was called the Sacramento-Placer Nevada Railroad. There were several businessmen in the area that wanted to invest public funds into this railroad, and they figured they would get reimbursed, or they would reap the revenue from that railroad and pay back a $50,000 bond that they actually had the electorate, once they incorporated, the electorate voted to pay for that. So they had this railroad that, the railroad from Sacramento to Folsom was already in place, but they wanted to bring it from Folsom really to Auburn, and then I think ultimately over the Sierras. And so they did some surveying, and this is kind of where it rolls into the Western States Trail, because we speculate this. We don't know for sure where that trail was from Auburn to Sacramento. But when you think about plausible routes, the railroad seems like they actually surveyed for the railroad. I think the first time was they did a map like in 1857. So that was a long time ago, and you would think that they would use a route that was already traveled. So a wagon road or a trail, and ultimately, really roads came from trails, right?
That's right.
So I think that it's plausible to think that where that railroad was supposed to be built was actually where the Western States Trail could be. There's lots of research that needs to be done, but just kind of a speculation. And what they actually did, they funded part of that railroad, and they built it all the way from Folsom to about Auburn Folsom Road and Whiskey Bar. That's kind of where they stopped. And then because it was the Central Transcontinental Railroad came into Newcastle in 1864, no need for this other railroad, right? So construction stopped, and it just, all their history, the city disincorporated because it owed all this money and didn't reincorporate again until 1888. But again, there's some interesting survey maps that show, the original survey showed that railroad going along the North Fork Ditch. And that North Fork Ditch, which was above the American River, served all those little mining communities along the river, where Beals Point, Mormon Island, and all of that. So they talked about how the railroad was initially going to kind of go along that ditch. Again, that and some of that is we can even speculate. I wonder if there was any part of the Pioneer Express Trail that was, part of the Western States Trail, at least down below. So.
Yeah, funny you should mention that. In preparing for our conversation, I looked up something here this afternoon, and there's a large granite boulder with a plaque on it that was placed on a hill overlooking Folsom Lake near Beals Point. And it was placed there by the California State Park Commission. And it reads, quote, between 1879 and well, this is not quite right. They got the dates backwards. Between 1854 and 1879, pioneer express riders rode this gold rush trail to many populous mining camps on the American River bars, now covered by Folsom Lake, including Beals, Dottons, Long, Horseshoe, Rattlesnake, and Oregon on the route to Auburn and camps beyond, meaning further eastward. So it seems to me that you're onto something here with respect to where that trail might have lied, because we know from Squaw Valley eastward to Carson City, we have journals, we have surveyor notes from the Placer County surveyor who was trying to lay out a road that would be attractive to immigrant travel back in the 1800s. So, but we don't have those notes, those journals, at least not right now, as it relates to the trail west of Auburn
Yeah.
to Sacramento or Sacramento to Auburn.
Well, and it would be interesting when you talk about Oregon Bar, because that is right below Auburn, you know, and that is where that Pioneer Express Trail goes. And there was the dam there, the Birdsall Dam, that was below, or just a little bit above Oregon Bar. The North Fork Ditch began from Birdsall.
Birdsall, that's right.
And that's kind of where it ties into my family history, because my great-great-great-grandfather, when they came here, it was, I think, right around late 1840s, early 1850s, helped construct that ditch. This is the old North Fork Ditch, and it brought water from the American River up where the Birdsall Dam was. And this ditch went all the way along the American River, which is now Folsom Lake, all the way down. You can follow it to past Granite Bay. There you can still find remnants of the ditch. But this was really the way the water was brought in for the purposes of agriculture. Again, my family, my great-great-great-grandfather, Joseph Kelly, helped to construct this ditch, especially the portions that came here near his property. So, and my grandfather, as a little boy, used to swim in the ditch. He remembers in the summertime he'd swim in it, loved it, it was great. But, you know, you can pretty much follow this ditch all the way down to Granite Bay. And it goes even farther than that, I'm sure. At least the part from the Birdsall Dam, probably down to about Rattlesnake Bar. And they settled along the American River, right down, of course the site is gone, but right along the river there, and homesteaded property. But it's interesting because that North Fork Ditch, you know, travels all the way down, I believe, into Folsom, you know, and you can actually, when you ride your horse down, you know, past Rattlesnake, you can actually ride in some of that ditch down below Granite Bay.
That's right.
So to think that Western States Trail, you know, followed the railroad and then, you know, was all in that area is kind of exciting. But to think that it came up is really exciting to me because, of course, that's where my family settled. So, you know, but it's hard to know. That's all you know, that area is all underwater.
Yes.
You know.
Wells Fargo claims that they had an express station at Rattlesnake Bar.
Yeah, well, Rattlesnake Bar was quite a settlement.
I think it had 500 inhabitants at one time,
at
or
least,
if not more.
Yes, and my great-great-great-grandfather's brother, Maurice Kelly, did some hydraulic mining over there. So, yes, and they had a school, the Monte Rio School was over there, where my grandfather went to school. He would walk there.
Okay.
So.
Well, now, the U.S. Department of Interior designated the trail from Beals Point to the Tahoe National Forest at Forest Hill as a national recreational trail. It already had been designated, that was in October of 1975. A year and a half earlier, the Department of Interior also designated the trail, it's called the Jedediah Smith National Recreation Trail from Sacramento at the confluence of the Sacramento and American River all the way to Beals Point. So now, to designate, it doesn't require an act of Congress, but the National Recreation Trail designation falls under the National Trail System Act of, I think it's 1968. And there's two other prospective designations. A historic trail designation, which requires an act of Congress, or a scenic trail designation, like the Pacific Crest Trail is a scenic trail. The Overland Immigrant Trail is a historic trail. Act of Congress signed by the U.S. President. But a National Recreation Trail doesn't require all the pomp and circumstance, the research and the history to designate it recreational.
Maybe we need to get it designated so we can get the real history.
I think so.
That seems like what we need to do to find that out, because it is interesting, and I love to speculate about where it could be. And you know, the Pioneer Express Trail, as it exists now, from Oregon Bar, you know, all the way down, that's relatively a new trail, which they built after Folsom Dam was put in. And I know that just from the history of my own mom, you know, that when she would drive over to the great-great-uncle's house, that trail wasn't there, you know, but there could have been a trail closer down along the riverbed, so, because that Pioneer Express Trail is, I don't, as it is today, I don't think is an old trail. That's a relatively new trail. We can tell just from, but there are some interesting, there's a rock wall building on part of that Pioneer Express Trail from, Mormon's Ravine towards Oregon Bar, and you start to get into that narrow area past our family ranch.
Yes.
There's that wall that was a little rock wall, and I wonder, what kind of historical significance that has, because that seems old.
It does, and I'm if we wanted to do a little research, and maybe at some point with respect to once the museum gets established and whatnot, we have the time to do it, perhaps the Bureau of Reclamation would have documented that history, given that they probably employed the services of archaeologists and historians. Maybe, I don't know if the environmentalists.
I don't know when they, because they took a lot of that property, like part of it was my family. They took that through eminent domain when they put in the lake. I don't know how much history because they were so focused, Bureau of Reclamation was so focused on the reservoir and I don't know what they would have done from a historical vantage point. I don't know.
I bring it up only because I know when they employed the services of archaeologists to study parts of the Middle Fork of the American River, and maybe perhaps even further up the North Fork, in anticipation of building the Auburn Dam. For example, a location just below the other Oregon Bar on the Middle Fork, near a place we often refer to as Rucky Chucky Rapids or Francisco's, downstream, there's a river bar called Cherokee Bar, and it was quite the settlement. And there's the rock walls, there's the foundations, there's the hydraulic mining up on the hillside, there's all kinds of things. But the Bureau of Reclamation did a very nice job documenting the history of just that area in particular. Well, in fact, for that matter, all up and down the Middle Fork, to the point where they anticipated where the reservoir or the lake would end and their dam would begin. So
interesting.
I don't know if they went to so much trouble as to do the same for Folsom or not.
That would be nice if they did, because Folsom was first, so
that's right.
I think that came in the 50s.
Yeah, 48.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, 1948. Yeah, so it's interesting, but that railroad, the survey map, they originally had one route, and then they ended up with a second route, but it did go along the river, the American River, where Folsom Lake is now, kind of near Auburn Folsom Road and so forth, and but what the railroad wouldn't have come up from. What the maps were for the railroad is that it would have come up around King Road now, and then up Auburn Folsom. It wasn't going to go along to Oregon Bar. That would have just been.
It'd been too difficult.
It would have been too difficult and not a direct route, right?
Yeah.
So for the railroad, and so it would have come up from Rattlesnake Bar or area or something.
Yes.
Kind of come up that way. So. So it's interesting. There's a lot of research that needs to be done, and with the internet now, and there are several local writers that are really involved in the history and doing research that you can get a lot of information now. So
yeah.
But I just did a little bit of digging, just because I was talking to a group, and I wanted to have that information for my speech about the incorporation of the city. And when I came into that, and then of course we were in one of the Western State Trail Museum meetings, we started talking about that. So it was kind of exciting.
Good timing.
Yeah.
Yes. Did they have a lot of questions for you?
Not so much about that, because that was really my introduction of the city, and the fact that, even during the 1800s, cities had difficult times. And, we were talking about how when the city had to pay all that money back and there was no railroad to generate the revenue, they had to go to the legislature and ask to be disincorporated, which today a city can't just disincorporate because they owe too much, they have debt, right? They have to file bankruptcy like the city of Vallejo did. So we were kind of talking about it in context of challenges and what kinds of things that cities go through today. But it is interesting because of the city's tie to the railroad. I mean, people talk about Gold Rush and Claude Channa, but really.
Railroad.
Railroad.
That's true. You mentioned your family, and they've been around since what, 1852?
Yeah, it's. I don't have a direct date, but I know they were here in 1852 for sure. So they may have come a little bit earlier, but they actually came from Alabama. They took a ship and went around the Horn and settled, arrived in San Francisco, and then came up from San Francisco and settled on the American River near Manhattan Bar, and because they were looking for gold, so they were, gold seekers. I know that my great-great-great-grandfather was a musician too, and I think that my great-great-great-grandma would have preferred to stay in San Francisco, but he had gold fever and wanted to, so they settled out there, and they built a home, which we don't know where the original house site was, because when the flood came in 1862, it wiped the first house out. So, just like it wiped out settlements all along the American River. I mean, the Chinese camps were destroyed and people were killed. It was a terrible, terrible flood. So they then relocated a little bit farther down the river on Manhattan Bar. And we actually know where that site is. You can actually see the old cellar, and that house was only removed when Folsom Dam was coming in. So we have a picture of it, and my mother has memories. And I used to visit the site with my grandfather, and he would talk about it. And so right there, it's right there where the Pioneer Express Trail is, just right above. So my family owned just a little bit north from Mormon's Ravine.
Okay.
Which is above Avery's Pond.
Yes.
Towards Oregon Bar. We call it the Albright Hill, but I don't know what, it doesn't have a local, that's just our family, we always call it the Albright Hill, but there was a couple mile stretch that they owned there, and the ditch furnished irrigation water, because they had an orchard. So the family orchard was between the ditch and the river. And there's actually a couple of old orange trees that are still on the Pioneer Express Trail, where there used to be an old fence right below. My sister lives in the house. That's the house that eventually my family, my great-great aunt, when the house was just, taken for the dam, they built above that. But there's a couple of orange trees that are still producing fruit today. So this orange tree here was actually an orange tree planted by my great-great-grandma, Alice Kelly Johnston. And she actually was one of the first farmers to graft an orange tree onto a different root system to get a better fruit-bearing tree. And so she probably did that. That tree was probably planted, I'd say, the mid to late 1800s. The house site, which was right below the orange tree, was built in about 1863, right after the flood of 1862 that took out the original house. And all this area here is below the North Fork ditch, and so this was all orchard. There were many, many different types of trees in here. She had a couple of orange trees, but there were cherry and what have you. But what's so neat about this is that this orange tree has been here for more than 100 years. There's a couple of orange trees that are still producing fruit today. And what's really great is when you see the orange peels on the ground, and you can just imagine, because those oranges are horrific. They taste terrible, because my great-great-great-grandmother got into grafting. And so she used the root base of some orange trees and then put the tasty, trees on the top, but those have died out. So you have the nasty tasting ones. But that's kind of an interesting landmark, because it's just right there. The American River they call that aid station there Dowden's, Dick Dowden's Post was after my dad.
Oh, after Dad.
So that aid station, just in today's terms, when you talk about that trail and, put it in perspective where it is. So.
Sure. Well, no, I'm glad you mentioned it. And didn't the property that was homesteaded go down and across the
It did.
American River?
It was actually, because in those days you owned part of the river, and our property was homesteaded. And so they owned that section of river, and they owned another 8 acres. There was more than 8 acres originally, but again, when the dam came in, they took a lot of it. Now there's 8 acres left on the El Dorado County side. So my family owns, there's all of it except for the 8 acres is on Placer County side. Of course, we don't own the river anymore, but so they owned part of that over there on the El Dorado County side. It was interesting that you could actually own part of the river in those days. Do that today.
Who's Harold?
So Harold was my great Aunt Alice's husband, Harold Jones.
Harold Jones. Yes.
Harold Jones, yes. And his sister, Etta, lived over, her ranch was not far from Marion Arnold's ranch. So Harold Jones lived in the little cabin until he died, so.
He was blind.
He was almost totally blind.
Almost totally blind.
Yeah, he had there was an industrial accident, so. Yeah.
Okay. You didn't tell me that.
Yeah, I think there was, there was something about, I don't know if he had, I think he was a butcher and there was some kind of spray or something happened, but he was almost totally blind. But it didn't matter. He got along.
No, he did.
Fine.
He did. Because when I'd ride my horse through the property, and I became acquainted with him and visited with him, because my name's Hal.
Yes.
Hal is typically short for Harold, and he asked me. And I said, no, my name's, my real name's not Harold, so.
Yeah.
So, but he was somewhat blind from all intent.
Yes, he really was. He couldn't drive or anything.
So when I'd ride through there on a training ride or what have you, he'd holler out, Hal, is that you?
You could tell by your horse's hooves.
You could tell from my horse's hoofbeats that it was me. And we had great time.
He had the old barn. The old barn was there until the 80s, actually, which was great. But because that barn served, was a cattle barn. He had cows.
Cows, that's right.
And my ancestors before him had cattle also. And so that old barn was quite old. It was probably built initially in the 1860s. It was amazing to me because his hearing was so good. I remember my sister and I playing in the old barn on some hay, and there was a rattlesnake. And he told us, we were, probably, because I think he passed away, I don't remember how old I was, but I was probably 5 or 6, and he told my sister and I, freeze, girls, just freeze, don't move. And so we just stopped. We didn't know where the snake was. And he had a hoe, because that's kind of what he walked around with, was
he had
his
a hoe. That's right.
And he heard that rattlesnake, and he found it and chopped the head right off. How he did it, I don't know. But he was able to use his hearing to find out where that rattled. So yes, so it doesn't surprise me that he didn't know that he was able to recognize your horse's hooves.
I guess. Or that, or every horseback rider came through there.
He yelled, is that you, Hal?
Hal, is that you? I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad we had that. There's not a lot of folks that we know that have property right on the old trail.
Yeah, and we owned quite a bit, and right.
And today, and the economics of the Western States Trail, there's several events besides the Western States Endurance Run, the Tevis Cup 100-mile ride. They're the two big ones, but there are other events held on what we would call today's Western States Trail. And what does that mean to local businesses and whatnot? I know that you're an advocate of Auburn being the endurance capital of the world, which it richly deserves. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll tell you that the city designated itself as the endurance capital of the world in 2003, and that was during my tenure on the council. So I remember Shannon coming forward and saying, hey, what do you think about this? And I was all for it because, at that time we did have the Western States Endurance Run, the Tevis Cup. The run was not nearly what it is today. That was in 2003. But we did have endurance. We had, there was the Auburn International Triathlon that happened in Auburn. And several others. And so, and it wasn't just the ride and running. There were, with the river with kayaks and things of that nature, boating and swimming and other activities as well, endurance type activities. So it was a natural fit, and right around the time that we designated ourselves, we proclaimed ourselves endurance capital of the world, we got our first endurance store, really, which was the Auburn Running Company. And Dan Moore owned that, and that all kind of happened at the same time. It was really a neat time for Auburn. But even then, we certainly recognized the importance of the trail and what types of activities that it brought, and the fact that people are recreating on the trail, and then our goal is to have them come up and visit Auburn and stay and eat and shop in the city, which then provides revenue for our residents and business owners and so forth. But it's a great economic engine. Really, it's just taken off. I served on the council initially from '98 until the end of 2005, and then I stepped off to join Governor Schwarzenegger's team. And then to come back, I came back in 2020. And it was just really interesting within that 15 years how much has happened with regards to endurance activities and the trail and so forth. And impressive, just very impressive to me. But really focusing on the endurance activities and on the trail in part, and trying to stimulate our economy. And we support the events that come here. It's amazing, the different kinds of events that we have, and international folks that come, and so.
Well, the city's done a great job turning what was the historic Central Square into, and part of, I guess.
Yeah, we have a designated area within Central Square that is our endurance, focus. Over there, where we have our tiles that are designated for our endurance advocates and athletes and supporters. You have a tile over there. So, clearly we recognize that, that contribution. And we actually, because so many people are using the trail these days, and the Confluence area, the city recently dedicated one of our transit buses. We have a Confluence shuttle now, where we go around to various spots and pick people up, and we'll shuttle them down to the Confluence so that they can go and recreate, or you can take your bike, and then you don't have to park down there because it's so crazy.
That's great.
But it's an electric bus, and so it's kind of exciting that we have that for folks. So again, the trail. So
both the big events, the Tevis Cup Ride and the Western States Endurance Run, and perhaps some of the other events as well, attracted not only just local participants, but participants from really all around the world.
Yeah.
And the run organization has, of course, a lottery now because of so many.
So popular. Yeah.
So that Auburn, and it's being recognized as the endurance capital of the world, is really richly deserved when you think about the participants and where they're coming from and why they're coming here. And I suspect the economics of benefits to local business owners is pretty good.
And it's interesting to even see, the businesses that have come in. We've got another running store. We've got several bike stores, that really mountain bikes and focusing on that. And businesses that are really focused on that aspect. And we have businesses that, we have a store in Auburn that prints all kinds of things Auburn related, and they, also, focus on the endurance capital, designation and so forth. But we're proud of the fact that, we're the finish line for the two grandfather rides, the horse ride, which my family has competed in many times. My horse actually successfully completed 6. I know yours, I think, was, 11 or something.
12 times.
12 times.
Yes.
But my horse did it 6 times. So, and that's really exciting, and I love it when we have the athletes that come in and the opportunity to meet with them, and, but it really, we're so fortunate to have the trail and to have our canyon, and, and it really does, all the different people that come here. And recreation's really, especially with COVID, people are just getting out and they just love the outdoors. And, it's a special designation for us because it really sets us apart from a lot of other, towns, and we are historic. We are, gold rush town. We were founded by, during the gold rush. Gold was discovered here. And so we have that rich history too. But then we can also benefit from the trail, so.
Let's look to the future.
Yeah.
So we've gone way back and now we're current times.
Yeah.
There have been, let's see, a number of efforts. I can think of a few. Legislation-wise, there was an effort not too long ago. United States Senators Boxer and Feinstein introduced legislation to consider the study of the Western States Trail as a part of becoming a National Historic Trail under that National Trail System Act.
Yeah.
It didn't, I don't know that it received the recognition it needed. It didn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
And it just sort of lingers. And I don't know what becomes of that. I pose that as something for you to think about.
I didn't even know that had happened.
Oh, yeah.
So,
see, it's kind of this well-kept secret. The process is that you introduce legislation, earn Congress's support to at least study the trail in its historical significance, and it's supposed to be national significance. And I guess you could argue that while maybe the trail itself wasn't the most popular route among immigrant travel, it certainly is, as of today, significant to thousands of people traveling from all over the world to come here to compete in an endurance contest over that same trail.
Yeah.
So, okay. We'd have to we'd put that on our to-do list.
Yeah, because you'll, obviously, when a measure's introduced, in Congress, it goes through a process. It has to be approved by both houses and then signed by the president. And so, whenever it was introduced, it didn't go anywhere. So you'd have to have something reintroduced. It doesn't just kind of linger somewhere. So, but that's something that, because when you were talking about that designation, the historic designation, I was thinking in my mind, I wonder if we've ever done that. So it sounds like you have tried, but that is something to put on the to-do list for the board,
Yes, I think so.
So, and maybe once the museum is up, then it really helps to.
I think the museum is a big step forward. Another one, and I don't know its significance, but it's before, or going to go before the State Assembly and Senate, is this effort to designate both the Tevis Cup 100-mile one-day ride and the Western States Ultramarathon Run as state endurance events, much like the poppy is the state flower, and the bear is the state animal, and that kind of thing.
I know that Mike Holmes kind of spearheaded that effort and is working with our local legislators to get something introduced.
So I bring those up because I think back to other mayors of Auburn and what they might have done with respect to the Western States Trail. And I don't know every mayor, and each one has had their pet project, I suppose, and the reason for them being elected and so forth. But there was one in particular that stands out. Back in the early 1930s, Dr. Conrad Briner was mayor of Auburn. He was a physician, and he, along with fellow native sons of the Golden West from parlor number 59, from where we're residing today, met several times and discussed the need to sign and rediscover the trail. Now, it wasn't known as the Western States Trail back in those days. I'm not exactly sure what they might have referred to it as maybe just the Tahoe to Auburn Trail.
Interesting.
But on a late September morning, 5 of them left downtown Auburn in front of Lucan's hardware store and traveled horseback eastward. And along the way, they placed metal signs saying, "This is where the trail. And they had already done their homework, so they knew where they were going and what
And
they
then
were
the Auburn
doing.
mayor did that.
And an Auburn
the,
mayor.
the mayor was in that group.
And
Was that the group with Wendell Roby in there?
It was.
Uh-huh.
Wendell Roby.
Yep.
He would have been a much younger man back in
Yeah.
those days, along with Earl Lukens, the
Yeah.
hardware store owner, Jack Shields, a son of a Placer County surveyor, Dr. Briner. And it seems to me there was one more. Bill Patrick.
Oh.
Sorry. He was the horse handler of the bunch.
Oh.
He knew how to. He had the pack horse, and he knew how to handle the horses. Roby knew of the way to go, and Briner was really in today's term a videographer.
Ah, interesting.
He carried with him a brand new 16 millimeter Brownie motion picture camera.
Oh, how neat.
He filmed it.
And you have those.
And we have that film footage.
Oh, wow. From 1938?
31.
31.
31.
Wow.
They filmed it.
Yeah.
They actually had someone out of San Francisco professionally
Edit
it
yeah.
and produce a black and white footage, no sound, with captions.
Silent movie.
It was a silent movie. And you thought, well, maybe Charlie Chaplin might have been in there somewhere,
But
but
you could
he wasn't.
probably try to read their lips and see what they're saying.
So they traveled and they hit all the high points and along the way and made over the Sierra Crest, meeting Robert Montgomery Watson at Robinson Flat, who knew the way over the.
He knew the way over.
Knew the way over the top. I could tell this was Dr. Briner's pet project.
Sure.
So you're going to be mayor here fairly soon. What,
Sure.
a year's time?
Yes.
You
I
probably
hope,
have.
of course,
Yeah.
elected by the council, but I'm in line for it, yes.
But as a city council member, a potential mayor, do you have any thoughts of not riding the trail necessarily? You're welcome to do that.
I've
certainly,
ridden the
but
trail so much and run
know-
that trail.
You know the way.
I know the way.
Project-wise,
Yeah.
thoughts of, we have a museum
That's,
proposal?
really, the Western States Trail Museum for me is, that's something that I am, I can almost consider like a legacy project for me on the city council. There's a lot of work that's involved with that, and I would love to see the city partner with the Western States Trail Museum Board of Directors, and so that's really what I'm really focusing my efforts on, from the city's perspective, and trying to support that and see that to fruition. That's, really what I would, like I said, kind of consider as a legacy. I think that, a tribute to the Western States Trail, and really seeing that partnership, creating that partnership. We're sort of in our preliminary discussions right now, as you well know, and so, trying to see that through.
Well, we've gotten a good start.
We've got a great start, and there's a lot of work. It's not just the location, but really that's the main focus. But then, how we can work together to promote it. The museum does so much for the city too, in my opinion, because again, it's another attraction, bringing folks here. And I think about, the location being in Central Square just is perfect because people can come up, visit the museum, shop, dine, stay overnight. And then we have our Confluence shuttle, which is just, 2 blocks away, where you can go and learn all about the trail and then take our little shuttle for $3.50 round trip and go down and walk on the trail. And what a neat opportunity, to not just learn the history, but then to be able to get on a shuttle and go down there and be there and live it, so to speak. So there's lots of opportunity for partnering. So that's really what I'd like to be able to see happen, for sure.
Very good. Well, good. Well, this has been a great conversation. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you.
on this.
I appreciate the invitation.
And,
look forward to working with you in the future and doing a little more history digging on that west part of the trail.
Yes.
So.
That'll be on our
Fun.
to-do list then.
That's right.
All right.
Good. Well, thank you.